Yeah, Victor is incredible. I was in Vegas last week for those two games against the G League Ignite, and I've been around basketball my whole life, and I think probably the most incredible prospect I've ever seen.
He is an NBA draft analyst and scout, media member, and advisor. We welcome Matt Babcock onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Matt?
No, it's going really well. Thanks for having me, guys.
And thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. Really excited just to gain your expertise on a number of just topics surrounding prospects. And within the last couple of weeks, we're recording this October 11th. There's been one prospect that's really caught the sports world by storm, and that's Victor Wembanyama. So I want to ask you, Matt, just for those who never heard of this guy before like 2 weeks ago, can you kind of give us a primer, a synopsis as to why Victor is so special and why a lot of people are saying this guy is a can't miss prospect for next year's draft?
Yeah, Victor is incredible. I was in Vegas last week for those two games against the G League Ignite, and I've been around basketball my whole life, and I think probably the most incredible prospect I've ever seen. Not necessarily the best. I mean, I played against LeBron when he was in high school, but this guy's 7'4", an 8-foot wingspan, shoots pull-up threes, fadeaways. He's very coordinated and skilled. I mean, brings up the ball in transition and just blocks and dunks everything. I think if he has a little bit of strength, I mean, he could be an all-time great. He's that kind of upside.
So I guess my concerns when I have my own casual basketball opinion when seeing like big men that are highly touted, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're injury prone. So I want to ask you from just a standpoint, like you said, for him getting stronger, are there any concerns in terms of his health, just in terms of like the first couple of years kind of adjusting to the NBA style of play? Is that any kind of a concern, or do you think he'll adapt pretty quickly?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a concern on some level or another. I mean, similar to what we talked about last year with Chet Holmgren. I mean, guys with, and I've said this before with my staff, is guys with unique body types oftentimes have unique problems. I mean, whether that's Zion Williamson or Chet Holmgren. So it's definitely something that we're keeping a pulse on. Obviously, I'm not a trainer. I'm not a doctor. So, I mean, I think, his medicals in the pre-draft is going to be interesting. I mean, I'm sure teams are going to be very careful with a guy with such a unique body type. And, from a scouting perspective, he is very thin. I mean, like I said, he's one of the most unique, incredible prospects I've ever seen, if not the most. But he does get knocked off his spot pretty easily. I mean, he's very thin, as opposed to the Chet Holmgren, which they actually are very similar. I would say Victor is more of a rich man's Chet, but very very similar. Unique, long body type, skilled. But Victor, in addition of being bigger, he does have a better body. I mean, he's already got some definition. Looks like he's got a frame to add muscle. And I think it's funny. His agent Buna Injai, who was a good friend of mine, and was my partner when I was an agent. He was sitting courtside with Rudy Gobert. And I remember watching Rudy at the Euro camp in Treviso, Italy, and he was extremely thin too. And Rudy, I mean, he has not had a problem physically at all. I mean, he added a ton of weight. And so I actually would compare, from a physical standpoint, Victor to Rudy more so than Chet, even though his game is much more like Chet's.
You brought up LeBron James earlier, so I have to go back to this because every year, I mean, we're always prone to hyperbole and we get excited for these prospects. Is Wembanyama, is he the greatest prospect that we've ever seen? Is it since LeBron James? In your professional opinion, where does he kind of rank at the moment? Of course.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be in that grouping of the unique top talents. I mean, it's to compare him to LeBron, I think it's really hard. For one, I mean, very different styles of play. I mean, other guys. I mean, Tim Duncan was a little bit before my time, but I remember my dad scouting him, talking about him. Hey, this guy's a surefire guy. I mean, Zion Williamson a couple years ago. I mean, what was a really top prospect. I would put him in that group, if not close to the top.
And from what you've seen so far, what are the reports from him, off the court and in practices in terms of some of the other intangibles like work ethic, things along those lines? I mean, obviously, we saw his range. He went, what was it, like 7 for 10 from 3-point range. So there's been some work. There's clear skill there. But in terms of his work ethic, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, his agent Boona Njai was my partner when I was an agent, and so I know their whole staff, and I've talked to a number of their guys about Victor for years, essentially. And then the coach, Vincent Colletti, he's the national team coach and Victor's coach on his team now. His son works for Boona, and everybody raves about Victor's work ethic. I mean, he's got, even though he looks like he would be a soft guy because he's not physically tough, is a pretty competitive kid. Again, sort of similar to Chet in that regard. And they all say he's very mature. So, I mean, all indicators right now are that it's 2 thumbs up all the way around.
I want to ask you, Matt, you brought up Zion, and I think, definitely his circumstances were different because through his development, there was a pandemic. But I just want to ask you, in terms of such a highly touted prospect like Victor, what advice would you give him in terms of kind of avoiding the pitfalls that maybe his peers have experienced? Because he's so highly touted. We're kind of in a new phase in terms of just this ongoing hype machine on social media. And then once he gets picked, and then Summer League, and then when he makes his debut, like what's the roadmap would you give him to make sure that he's hitting all the benchmarks and he doesn't encounter any like unfortunate setbacks?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that type of advice would vary from player to player. I think with Victor specifically, in looking at Zion's situation, is control what you can, which is your body. And so, I mean, I think Zion's big issue is he gained so much weight. And he had the injury problems. I mean, with Victor, obviously, totally different body type than Zion, but extreme. So he needs to get stronger. He needs to do the little stuff to make sure that his body's right.
So I just want to ask you, just in general, when you're evaluating a prospect, what exactly are you looking for in their game? Are you looking for just, because I realize now that just the way that the sport of basketball has gone internationally in America, just in terms of this player development, I think that the skill set has probably been raised compared to years past, just through the evolution of the game. So what exactly are you looking for that makes a great NBA prospect specifically compared to somebody that might have just a game better fit for international play or some other form of basketball, but that's not necessarily professional?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the prospect where they're at in their career. I mean, obviously, there's so many different paths now for guys. I mean, it's we got the G League Ignite, we got Overtime Elite, guys going to Australia, obviously, guys going to college. And another thing is, you know, there's so many different roles that can be filled in the NBA. It's not just like there's one set of skills that we're looking for, that makes an NBA player. Essentially, we want a lay of the land, have all the variables in the equation to figure out who a guy is and how he potentially fits and coexists with other players and contributes to winning. And so I know that's a vague answer. It's sort of a hard question because there's so many different circumstances that would make or break a prospect in regards to how do they translate.
Curious about the G League. We've now seen like the Ignite for a couple years now, and just in your perspective, comparing that to like the college game, do you see the G League as becoming like a better vehicle for these players that are fairly certain that they're going to go pro, especially maybe like a year after they've played once they're eligible? What's the kind of comparison right now between G League and college? Because I guess the college side might be the travel that's involved, as well as maybe a more intense crowd environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference between college and the G League Ignite and Overtime Elite, because I think they're pretty similar, is that it's really, I mean, going the alternative path with G League and Overtime Elite is really a commitment to being a pro. And obviously, there's a whole different conversation as far as college players not being amateurs and being paid and being pros now. But they still, you go to college, it's sort of like the natural progression of maturing as a kid off the court too. And so that's the biggest difference for me is the guy goes to the G League Ignite. I mean, he's a pro. He doesn't have anything to worry about it other than being a pro basketball player. College kids are going to class. They've got, obviously all the social parts of going to a big school. And so, I mean, I think off the court stuff is the biggest difference for me.
Do you see a change in terms of a highly touted high school prospect? Maybe college for somebody who, has a great skill set for the pros that in the future, that may not be the best way for them to go in terms if they are, guaranteed to be a lock within the professional ranks. I mean, for a long time, college was seen as a platform to not only to maybe gain an education possibly, but for mostly gain knowledge from some of the best basketball minds around the country, depending which program you went to. But as you mentioned, with the G League and with Overtime Elite, if that's a better option, do you see kind of the college ranks really suffering in the future? Is that something that could be possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. I still think, I mean, we're a ways away from it being, a total negative across the board. I think the optionality, in my opinion, is really great for kids. And I think sometimes, college is the right decision for one guy, and maybe G League or OTEs, a better decision for the next. It kind of depends on where they're at, from a maturity level. I mean, if a guy needs to address, physical issues, maybe one outlet has a great weight program, a plan in place to really help what he needs. And then, like I mentioned before, some kids just need to go to school and be just like a normal kid. And it's kind of like the natural step of growing up, And so, I mean, I really don't think there's a blueprint of a mom and dad. Here's how, you need to get your 14-year-old to play in the NBA. I think you need to kind of look at all the options every step of the way. And it's kind of, continually like go back to the drawing board and just make good decisions. Cause there's a lot of paths to the pros these days.
Absolutely. And I agree with you about liking the options that these players have for sure. Want to go back to 2023 draft prospects and discuss the other player who was kind of headlining those games that we saw last week. And that would be, of course, Scoot Henderson. What are you seeing from him? And would he be the consensus number one pick if it weren't for Wemby being there?
Yeah, no, I'm such a huge fan of Scoots. A couple years ago, his high school coach and mentor is a guy named Desmond Eastman. In my senior year in high school, I went to high school in Atlanta and actually played on his nickname's the General. On the General's AAU team in a few tournaments. So he and I have been close, and he invited me out to the family. They own a gym in Marietta, Georgia, and I got to meet with the family, meet with Scoot, watch him work out. And the kid blew me away, and just kind of getting to know him and his family, learning about his work ethic and his drive and killer instinct. To go on top of it is just, his talent. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised at all that he's, really jumped up the ranks. And I think he's going to continue to improve. He's got the growth mindset. And to answer your question, yes, I do think he'd be the number one pick if it weren't for Wemby. But I do think Amin Thompson is right there as well. Those are the top three for me at the moment. But Victor and Scoot, I think have separated themselves a little bit.
How much of a limitation is it now? I mean, obviously, Scoot is overcoming that with what you just said there, but that he is listed at 6'2". Of course, he's 18. He could grow some more, but in 2022, how much of a limitation is, being under the height of like 6'5", let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, traditional bigs and undersized guards are really losing value a lot. But I think there are exceptions, and for smaller guards, the exceptions are you an elite on-ball creator, which Scoot is. I mean, I think he's going to be, I mean, the two comps I have for him is Derrick Rose in his prime, and then Stephon Marbury in his prime. Like that's what I'm expecting Scoot to become. Which both those guys were elite players at their prime and at their peak. And so I do think he is an exception to the rule. Also, keep in mind, I believe he's got like a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan. He's got huge hands, and he's built like a bull for a guard. I mean, this guy is just like an animal. I care less how tall he is because he's so effective.
So, Matt, when you have two highly touted players like this, and the hype is probably going to be at a fever pitch. Do you think that will push them? Like, what is that dynamic like? In terms of having two highly touted picks, they're probably going to be linked together. I've already heard a lot of pundits mentioning both in the same sentence in terms of kind of this budding rivalry that hasn't really come to fruition yet. Like, how do you see that intangible playing in terms of how they perform in the professional ranks?
I know Scoot better than I do Victor. I mean, obviously got to spend some time, being around him, watching him, observing him in Vegas. And I do plan to go to Paris this year to see him and hopefully be able to, chat with him and his family. Both seem like competitive kids to me. All the rumblings after that first game is that Victor should shut it down, all that. And his agent really shot that down quickly, saying, hey, even if we wanted to do that, that's not Victor's MO. I mean, that's not how he's built, and he's a basketball player. So he's going to play basketball. That's what his the secondary agent, Jeremy, it said to me that they had discussed. And then with Scoot, I mean, that guy's like Kobe Bryant 2.0. Like, good luck trying to get that guy to not play or get distracted over something like that. I think both kids are hyper focused on succeeding and doing what it takes, and it's really nice to see too. I mean, those are the kind of guys that not only myself, I think everybody in the basketball industry appreciates.
That brings up a really interesting point. We've seen examples in like the college football game. Granted, they've been few, but of players kind of, shutting it down as you alluded to there. Is that something in the modern day that would really turn off a scout in terms of like, we've seen what we've seen from both Scoot and Wemby. If they did decide, like just hypothetically, hey, we're shutting it down, our stock is through the roof. Is there still kind of this, and I hate to say old school mentality, but just a mentality of like, well, we have to question their work ethic now that they're shutting this down?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's something that I get asked this type of question every year. Usually around pre-draft time when you guys bailing on playing, and at the combine and stuff like that. I mean, to me, I am probably cut from an old school cloth a little bit in the sense of like I just said about Victor. Hey, you guys want to be pro basketball players? Like, play basketball, right? And the whole idea of you could get hurt and there's risk. There's risk every single day of your life. I mean, where do you draw the line? And so. I don't think guys should be reckless, but like, come on, just lace up your shoes and play basketball.
Totally agree.
To that point, Matt, I want to focus on this year's prospects and with Chet Holmgren. You just mentioned earlier, just with him, his unfortunate injury. Kind of from that whole situation, what was your observations, and do you see the setback being something that might be a problem to kind of watch for Chet's career? Or do you think this would be a minor speed bump in terms of his development?
I certainly hope it's just the minor speed bump. I'm like I said before, I'm not a trainer, I'm not a doctor. I've always been concerned with his body. I don't know if he's got a body type to add much weight, and so I don't know if that's contributed to this injury or if this was just circumstantial. I'm certainly rooting for Chet, and I think with him being such a long, tall player that's skilled. I don't think he's dependent on his athleticism too much. So I'm hoping he can make a full recovery and really never look back. And it's just sort of a small bump in the road.
I know this is kind of an old news question, but I do still think it's interesting, and was curious your thoughts. Were you surprised when it was announced that Paolo was the number one pick this last draft? And what were your thoughts on that, kind of the maybe potential higher ceiling of Chet? Obviously, we don't know, has to be played out, but what were your thoughts on how the last year's draft went down?
Well, I heard all the rumblings right before the draft. I was in New York at the draft, actually, and we had debated, do we switch our final mock draft going into the draft, even, having heard those rumors, and I didn't do it. I knew the rumors. I didn't buy it. So Jeff Hammond, Jeff Wellman and John Hammond, they fooled me. So I actually did pretty good with my mock draft this year, but I missed the first pick. So it wasn't a great start, but we turned it back around pretty quickly.
What is your evaluation of Paolo in terms of how he's going to fit with the Magic, and what observations do you have in terms of his performance in Summer League and anything else that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following Paulo for forever. I mean, I remember the first time I watched him was at the Hoop Summit. I think he was just 15 years old. He wasn't part of the Hoop Summit. They brought in a team to scrimmage, and he was incredible. And I've probably watched him. It's felt like 100 times since then. And what I like about Paulo, and it kind of similar to what we were talking about, is that guy is just a baller. Like that guy doesn't care. That guy will play all day, every day. I've seen him just show up to. Like, I was in Utah at a high school event, and he had just gone off the plane. He played in the grind session in Phoenix and won MVP. I think their team won the championship. Hops on a plane, shows up to the game late in Utah, laces them up, drops 20 in the second half. Did he blink an eye kind of thing, and that's I think that's him in a nutshell. He's just he's somewhat of a carefree guy, but and I mean that in a good way. Just he's got like a confidence to him, where I just he knows he's good. He loves the game. He's just a baller, and I think as far as his fit in Orlando, he's a pretty he's primarily like a scorer in my mind. He's a big bodied, explosive scorer. I mean, you can put a guy like that on any team, and so I do think whether it happens quickly or not. I mean, I do think he's going to be their primary scorer, and they've got a nice young core unit sort of developing now, and I think he's going to be the centerpiece.
Wanted to get your thoughts, Matt, on something a little bit more conceptual, I guess. You've analyzed several drafts, obviously, so I assume you've had a lot of time to think about this question. With what we're hearing right now, so the Wemby highlights come out, everyone freaks out. Of course, it's awesome. The Scoot highlights as well, equally awesome, and everyone talks about, okay, now the narrative is we're going to have, I don't know, 20 teams tanking to get Wemby. I'm just kidding. But, the tanking narrative comes out as it does every year when we get excited about these prospects. Do you still feel like the draft lottery system is the most effective way to do an NBA draft?
I think it's a great question, and it's funny. I saw the press conference Adam Silver did, I think a week ago, addressing this, and he didn't really have a good answer, and it kind of came off a little awkward. Right? I don't blame him. I mean, I'm glad
Sure.
I'm not in his spot because
Right.
it's one of those things where there's a clear cut problem, but I mean, what's a reasonable solution? Like, I sure don't know. It does feel a little broken, but I mean, again, I really don't have a solution. I mean, you've got a guy like Wemby and Scoot, and I'm really high on him and Thompson, like I mentioned. I mean, naturally, these teams that aren't where they want to be, want guys like those three, or I mean, even after those players, I mean, I think there's still some good guys that teams could build around. So, yeah, I mean, I think just human nature. Teams will do what they need to do to try and get a solid player to build around.
Yeah, with all the narratives that we get in the offseason or just whenever the hype comes out about these prospects, I almost wonder if we would have less teams involved in the tanking conversation overall if we went to, I know it's a bad sport comparison, but like just the NFL system, like your worst team is going to get that first pick. I don't know that I necessarily think it would be like 5 teams in single digit wins that are willing to go, that low. But of course, that's highly debatable.
Yeah, I think teams. I don't think I like that idea. I think what would happen is the tanking would be even more extreme.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, you're still okay. You can tank as much as you want. There's still a lot of risk. I mean, OKC could win no games this year and end up with the 4th pick.
Absolutely. The other question I had here that's this kind of a little bit more conceptual with all the young talent that you're seeing come into the league each year. I mean, Justin and I were just saying the other day, like 25 and under seems like it's the deepest the league has ever been and the most talented. Is the NBA ripe for expansion at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I mean, from a business standpoint too. I mean, we've got 2 great markets. I mean, with Seattle and Las Vegas as the assumed next destinations, and I mean, and basketball's really become a truly global sport, and so I mean, it's continued to grow and expand. I'm all for it.
Matt, I want to ask you in regards to this year's draft class, are there any prospects that are falling under the radar that, hey, my friend here has a league pass subscription that he should be watching out for in terms of kind of those Wednesday night games that might not seem appealing, but might have some great rookies? Are there any prospects that we should be watching out for?
Yeah, I mean, Tari Easton's been doing a great job in the preseason. I mean, I don't think he's a total sleeper. I mean, he's first round pick, but it looks like he's going to play a solid role for the Rockets. I could see him being a guy that earns himself all rookie team type deal. And other than that, I mean, it's really hard to say of like who's going to get the opportunities to play much. I am expecting like those top 5-6 picks to play pretty big roles on their teams. Obviously, aside from Chet being out for the season.
Fantastic. Matt, this has been a great chat. Thank you very much for providing your expertise on just the upcoming draft class and this year's draft class. Please let our viewers and listeners know where they can find you on social media and also any upcoming projects you're working on as well.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Matt Babcock 11. Stay tuned. I've got a lot of new stuff coming up. I have a new podcast coming out. We're working on a docuseries. Really trying to diversify my media presence and content we're putting out. But yeah, I'm going to stay on the road, still watch players, and just do as much as I possibly can. Honestly.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, guys. Take care.